District 6 Museum, and I have threatened to forcibly remove you at 5:30 because we've had a hell of a long day and quite a long week after the taxi strike. You know, we had a lot of the schools that weren't able to come last week, then all postponed to this week. So it's been, so I apologize if I'm grumpy, but I'm Mandy Sanger. I manage education in the District 6 Museum. We're going to split you up into 3 groups so that you'll get 3 different perspectives, different insights into the story of District 6. We're very different to most museums in that there isn't a start and an end. It's more like a memory box. We're a community museum, so government just lets us fill in a lot of forms, but we're not a government museum. We're a community museum, and our roots are in the anti-apartheid movement. So we're not a post-apartheid museum. We're a museum that was part of the resistance when District 6, where you're standing in now and you're standing on, was a site of displacement of people to create what we now have, which is a segregated city, right? So the roots of that segregated city, as many of you might know, is universal. It's not peculiar to South Africa. In South Africa, they used race to define where people live, but it was part of a much broader universal movement to create cities for cars. So the building of highways, the segregation of places where people live and work, it was all part of that universal movement that was happening in the world in the 40s and 50s. But in South Africa, that became an excuse to forcibly remove people who were not white, who were not classified white, from urban spaces to the outskirts, what we know of as the townships on the Cape Flats. But prior to that, and it's very important to the story that we tell at the District 6 Museum, prior to that, during the colonial period, when South Africa became a republic, 80% of the people were forcibly removed and required to live in 13% of the land with the retribalization of people. So the Bantustans and the homelands and the pass laws, the 1913 Native Land, I almost said Land Act, the pass laws of 1913 displaced millions of people and locked them into rural areas. So when we tell the story of urban displacement, we think it's important for people to understand it in the context of the rural-urban divide in South Africa. So there are 2 problems that need to be solved in the post-apartheid period that as a museum we are supporting. And that is the desegregation of urban spaces, but also the problem of the rural-urban divide. And so this exhibition, we use District 6 and the forced removals during apartheid as a case study. The last contextual point you need to understand is that this museum wasn't created by expert historians or, you know, people who got together, put a funding proposal together, and then the museum landed like a UFO. And then people had to we had to do marketing to get people. This museum was created with the community that was displaced. And so it's, to get to where it is now, it went through many iterations, right? And layers upon layers were added. And we're still adding layers. So this exhibition is called Digging Deeper. It's our methodology. We're continuing to dig deeper into the story of displacement. The first exhibition that was held in this church, it was a Methodist church, and it was a site of resistance to apartheid. The detention center across the road was notorious for torturing and killing anti-apartheid activists. And so this church became a site of protest. But how we protested during the apartheid was very creatively. We used art, music, performance. And so the way this exhibition is designed is in the spirit of the resistance to apartheid. So the first exhibition was called Streets. It was meant to be up for 2 weeks, and it's never come down. So we didn't start out thinking about a museum. We started out thinking about how can we map the stories of people who were displaced. And so artists came and they drew this map. It's a memory map. So cartographers here, don't question us on perspective. And it's probably not correct in terms of mapping language, but memory, this came out of many workshops where people argued about where the streets were and what street was in relation to what other street. People argued, they fought because the streets were destroyed, were bulldozed. And so what remained were only remnants of these streets. And there was a lot of denialism, you know, about the life in District 6 and the culture. It was dismissed by experts. Some may be amongst you here. It was dismissed as just a slum, you know. And so the big role of this museum is to reconstruct the people who lived in District 6. So we're not telling the stories of the great political heroes who fought against apartheid. That's important. But our museum is about telling the stories of the ordinary people who lived and then marking where they lived. And that's a long process. And we don't only do it in the museum, we do it on site. So through storytelling, we go to certain places that don't exist anymore. And we reconstruct it through memory. And now we're beginning to work with people who do GIS mapping and all of that. And we're starting to connect, you know, and photograph exactly where people's lounges were. We're reconstructing memory maps of people's lounges, their kitchens, and we're doing a lot of oral history projects related to where people actually lived. So if any of you want to do pro bono with us and help us develop apps, please contact us. So for now, what I'm going to do is we need to get you into 3 groups. They don't have to be equal. And then can I introduce you? So my family is not from District 6. I'm 60 years old now, and I'm first generation born into apartheid, right? My older brothers and my parents, they experienced apartheid displacement. I grew up in racialized spaces, right? But we have 2 people here who are going to be with us, Auntie Susan and Auntie Yasmina. Auntie Susan and Yasmina. Susan's a returnee, so she's come back to District 6, and Yasmina is still waiting to come back. My family is forcibly removed from Claremont, Newlands, so the whole of Table Mountain was declared white.
Wow.
So District 6 is one of 42 sites. And then you have the other mountain, Hottentots Holland. The same thing happened at the foot of that mountain. And then you have places like District 6 in every province. So Firetown is the other famous area. So my family is from Claremont, Newlands, but Auntie Susan and Yasmina are from District 6.